If you run an older car and are worried about the MOT, this video is for you. I'm going to take you through all the simple checks that you can do to make sure that you don't get any nasty surprises when it comes to MOT. DVSA want people to be safe on the road. For that reason, they produce a handy checklist of everything that's on the MOT test. Not only that, but also available online is a complete list of exactly how the tester will test every component on the car that gets tested. It really is nothing to be frightened of. The tests I'm going to talk to you about today don't need any tools, they don't need any specialist knowledge. You don't need a workshop, you could do it at the roadside or in a car park, and these tests are easy. It's not going to cover everything because there are certain things on the test like the emissions and the brake rollers that you will not have at home. But a lot of cars fail their tests for very simple, minor things. So we're going to go through the checklist and show you everything that you can check with just a simple set of tools. One of the most common reasons that vehicles fail their MOTs are the lights. There'll be a bulb not working, and it doesn't need to cost you a full MOT and a potential retest fee just for the sake of a bulb that are a couple of quid to replace. There are certain lights that are mandatory depending on the age of the vehicle. Testing them couldn't be simpler. Pop the key in the ignition and then reach in the cabin, switch on the tail lights. You should see illuminated a tail light on each side, and this is the gotcha. There's also a light that illuminates the registration plate. This is quite a common one to fail on. If you put your hand underneath the lights like that, you will see them working. And while on the subject of registration plates, it should be clear, readable, and mounted either as far as the rear or as far as the front of the vehicle as you can get it, and as close to horizontal as possible. If you've got a registration plate that has started to deteriorate, you might want to change that before you present it for MOT. Also, things like registration plate in the windscreen, that's not as close to the front of the vehicle as you can get it. Next thing we'll do is we'll flick the hazard warning lights on and see if all the indicator bulbs flash. It's also worth checking that there's no moisture trapped inside the light cluster. If there's a crack in the light cluster but the light can still be seen, you may get away with that. But if it's actually taking on water and filling up, then that could cost you a test. What we'll do now is stand on the brake pedal and make sure that the brake lights illuminate. It may help to have a friend check this with you, but you can check it if you're on your own. Just reverse it up to wall at night, and when you stand on the brake pedal, make sure that you get nice red glow both sides of the car. The other lights that you want to check, if your car was first used after 1980, make sure that the fog light comes on in the rear. You need at least one fog light to the rear of the vehicle, either centre or over to the driver's side. You also need to make sure that when you switch the fog light on, that you get an illumination on the dashboard. Now I've noticed on this car, I haven't got an illumination on the dashboard, and it looks like we don't have a fog light to the rear of the vehicle. We can also see some interference, so that tail light is getting brighter and dimmer as the indicator flashes. On this vehicle, I'm not too bothered about that because it's been standing a while and the battery's pretty much flat. But if you find the operation of some of the lights interfere with some of the other lights, you probably have a bad earth. Again, could fail you. For cars newer than about 2018, if fitted with front fog lights, they need to work. For an older car like this, it's not a problem. Same with reverse lights. Of course, the other thing we need to check is that the horn works. It should give out a clear, audible tone, it should be loud enough, and it shouldn't change tone as it sounds. It should be one continuous tone. The other thing that we can do whilst we're here is check the exhaust is actually firmly attached and not hanging off. This one's okay because I've just put new exhaust rubbers on it. But if that's hanging down, then that's a problem. Stuff like the rear wiper isn't tested. And another fallacy, people claim that the spare tyre is part of the MOT. It isn't. If you don't have a spare tyre, don't worry about it. If you've got a bald spare or a flat spare, again, not a problem, but I'd probably get that changed anyway. The other thing that we can do whilst we're at the rear of the vehicle is make sure that the tailgate opens and closes. If your tailgate doesn't open and close, there is a risk that they may actually refuse to test your car. This brings me on to another good point. There's a load of rubbish in the boot of this car, and it is worth making sure that you've removed all things like crisp packets, sandwich packets, things like that from the cabin and the tailgate. If someone has to test it, they're more likely to fail it if it's got a borderline advisory if the car isn't clean and presented nicely. You might even want to vacuum the car out. Please don't present your car for test full of stuff, because it might be that they'll just refuse to do the test. After you've checked that all the taillights are working, you want to have a complete walk around the car and make sure that there's nothing obvious loose or hanging off, things like bits of trim. Make sure that you open and close every door. It should latch firmly, and you shouldn't be able to open it without actually pulling the handle. Similarly, the door handle inside needs to work. A couple of the other things that you want to check on your walk around the car. Check that things like your mirrors are intact, that they're not loose, they're not about to fall off, and that the glass isn't cracked or smashed. If you can't see out of that mirror, if the glass is missing or it's smashed, it's very cheap to buy a replacement glass that just sticks over the glass. But again, you don't want to fail an MOT for the sake of something really simple. Print yourself one of these check sheets off. I'll leave a link in the video description. And as you walk around the car, just make notes of anything that needs to be done. Be sure to check things like the integrity of the fuel cap. The fuel cap itself should be tight when closed. And also, that little rubber seal shouldn't be split or damaged. Here's a great example here. That rubber seal has actually got a bit of a gap in it. So I'm going to have to replace that before I present the car for MOT. Another bit of a gotcha that you need to be aware of. If your car's fitted with a tow bar, the tow bar electrics need to work. You can test these by plugging it into a trailer or a light board and making sure that all the lights do what they're supposed to do. Whilst we're still outside the car, one of the other checks we need to do is our wheels and tyres. We're looking at the reel itself, making sure that it's not buckled, it's not got any obvious curb damage, making sure that the centre cap or the wheel trim isn't hanging off and likely to become detached. The tyres themselves, we need to check the tread. So this is the tread that runs around the outside of the tyre. This is a winter tyre because we use this car as a bit of a winter hack. The easiest way to check that you've got enough tread on your tyres is just to take a simple 20p piece, put it in the treads of the tyres. And what we're looking for is to make sure that it goes down further than that little lip on the 20p. 1.6mm is the tread limit for wear on the tyres. You also need to check things like the tyre walls to make sure that there's no cuts or damage. Make sure that the tyres are properly inflated. And the other gotcha, make sure that the tyres all match. If you've got different size tyres, or you've got tyres that are directional and they're fitted on the wrong side of the car, so they're rotating the wrong way, that's a failure. Obviously I've used the front wheel because it's a bit easier because I can turn it out and show you the tread. So what you're going to have to do at the rear is peer under the car, run your hand around the back, make sure that you have a look underneath so that you can see that you've checked the back of the tyre as well, not just the bit that we can see. Before we move inside the car, I'm going to show you some under bonnet checks that we can do. Obviously, make sure that the bonnet opens on the catch, and also when it's closed that it latches securely. Make sure that when the bonnet's popped, it does actually latch on its secondary release. One thing to bear in mind during the MOT is that the testers aren't allowed to take anything apart that they would need tools for. So they can lift plastic covers that they can unclip by hand, but anything that requires a screwdriver, that has to stay on the car. This is just a visual inspection. Under the bonnet, we want to check that there's no obvious leaks. We want to check things like the coolant has got some coolant in it, that the power steering fluid's got some power steering fluid, and the engine oil, if you pull the dipstick, or if you've got one where you're checking the dashboard, check that there's some engine oil. The other thing you want to check is that there's some hydraulic fluid in the brake fluid reservoir. If any of these fluids are low, it may be that the tester may just refuse to do the test. And the other one that's the big gotcha, make sure you top up your windscreen washer reservoir, because if those washers don't work, that's a fail. And for the sake of a little bit of screen wash, why wouldn't you? Whilst we're around the front of the car, we want to check for the condition of the wiper blades. These are absolutely atrocious, and I've ordered a new set which will be going on before it's presented for MOT. You want to operate the wipers and make sure that they clear the windscreen, and you also want to check that when you pull the washer jets, you get a jet of screen wash up onto the screen. If you find that this isn't hitting the screen or it's blocked, just a needle sewing pin down the end of there, clean it out, and it also lets you adjust it and you can put it so it hits the screen. You want it to hit the screen in a nice spot. You don't want it going up over the car, and you don't want it dribbling down here. I think it's fair to say that nothing we've done so far has been particularly complicated or needed any specialist tools. The other thing we need to do once we're at the front of the car is check the operation of the side lights, the headlights, and the main beam. So if we pull the stalk there, we should see that the main beam flashes. We then switch the lights to the first click, and we should see both front side lights come on. In this car, they're mounted in the front bumper, but sometimes they're actually included in the headlight unit itself. We then pop back inside the cabin, click that onto its second position, and we should see that the headlights will come on. What we now need to do is engage high beam, which might be a pull or it might be a push. And what we need to make sure of when we switch high beam on is that we get an indicator light that tells us that high beam has been activated. One of the other obvious checks while we're in here is to make sure that that rear view mirror is intact, but also this needs to come out. You're not allowed to have things hanging off your mirror. And whilst you're at it, check that you haven't got any phone holders or sat navs stuck to the windscreen. You also want to make sure that there's no cracks in the windscreen. Once you've been around the outside of the car, check under the bonnet, next thing to do is to move inside. First thing on your list is your seat belts. Pull them out all the way and make sure that they're not frayed or they're not cut or there's no damage to them. And the other thing you need to do is to give them a sharp tug like this and they should stop. This is how a retractable seat belt operates. Normally you would pull it round yourself gently, but if you pull it hard, like in an accident, it should lock off. What you need to do, check all of the seat belts in the car, and if you want some brownie points with your tester, pull the rear seat belts out and latch them into the latches. This makes the tester's life a little bit easier. If you have a seat that tilts forward to let passengers into the rear, make sure when you put it back into its position, it does actually stay there and it is firmly secure. Also, make sure that your seats aren't loose in the runners or moving around in the cabin. And whilst you're here, in the footwell, you need to make sure that you've got pedal rubber on the brake pedal. I realise that seems a little bit of a strange one, but what it's for is if you've got wet feet because you've just got into the car and it's been raining, your feet aren't going to slip off the brake pedal. Sitting inside the car itself, we need to make sure that the steering wheel doesn't have any damage on the outside of it, and also that the steering column itself isn't loose. So if you grasp the wheel firmly with two hands, it shouldn't move and it shouldn't excessively move up and down. If it's a height adjustable steering wheel, make sure that that adjuster, when it's closed, locks it in position and then it's not free to flap around. The other thing we can do while we're sat here, the car has the handbrake off at the moment, so it will roll, but if I pull the handbrake on, I should then be able to push the car and make sure that it doesn't roll with the handbrake applied. You go. The handbrake is holding, yet with the handbrake off, it is actually free to roll. While we're sat here, pull the wipers and make sure that it actually washes the screen and that the wipers clear the screen effectively. Like I say, these wipers do need to be changed. And finally, there are some checks that are best done with the engine running. One of the things that we're interested in is that all of the lights go out, things like the engine management light, the various ignition lights. This particular car has an ABS light on because it's got an ABS wheel sensor that needs to be changed. That will be getting changed before MOT. Any warning lights, such as ABS, airbags, or your engine management lights that don't go out are potentially failures. What we're interested in under the bonnet is that there's no leaks of exhaust gas coming from the exhaust manifold and that there's no leaks of fluid coming out the engine whilst it's running. The other thing that we want to check is that the exhaust isn't giving out any nasty black smoke, isn't blowing, isn't making excessive amounts of noise, and that all the smoke is actually coming out of the tailpipe and not somewhere else in the system. This is obviously not a completely exhaustive list of everything that you can check. If you're willing to jack the car up and you have the facility to do that, you can do things like testing wheel bearings and looking for any play in the steering. But this is just the basic stuff that a surprisingly large amount of cars fail for. With the maximum price of an MOT for a car costing over £50, it seems silly to waste that money on a car that, for the sake of 10 minutes checking, you would have spotted something that you could have fixed beforehand. If you've got any other pre-MOT advice, comments or suggestions, please leave them for other people in the comments of this video. And if you found this video useful, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel for more great advice on motoring, and I hope to see you on the next one. In the meantime, I've got a few jobs to do.